I sat frozen in my chair, every eye in the boardroom fixed on me like I was some outdated server they'd finally decided to decommission. Across the glossy mahogany table, Xavier Blackwood, barely 45, leaned back with the casual arrogance of a man who thought disruption meant firing anyone over 50. Next to him sat Aurora, his 24-year-old daughter, fresh MBA still warm in her hands, already wearing the company badge that used to hang from my neck. Xavier's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "You're finished here, Alexander. 25 years is long enough." The words hit deeper than I'd expected. No acknowledgement of the decades I had poured into this place. No mention of the sleepless nights, the holidays sacrificed, the countless crises I had carried on my shoulders. Just a cold dismissal, as if 25 years of loyalty could be erased in a single sentence. I thought of the text I'd sent my son Jake 2 days earlier. "Can't make it to your graduation ceremony this weekend. The company needs me for this deployment." He had written back, "It's okay, Dad, I understand." I had canceled that trip so I could finalize a system rollout that made this firm millions. And now here I was, discarded in front of strangers and a smug girl who had never fought through a single midnight network collapse. Xavier leaned back in his chair, his suit immaculate, his tone rehearsed. "You'll sign your separation papers now. HR will process the exit. This will be clean." His eyes didn't hold regret, just arrogance. The satisfaction of a man who thought he had won. I glanced at the folder he slid toward me. The weight of the papers heavier than it should have been. It wasn't just a contract. It was the eraser of my name, my legacy, my 25 years of building the invisible threads that held this company together. Aurora tapped her nails on the table, impatient, as if my life's work was a minor inconvenience standing between her and her promotion photos. Around the room, no one spoke. No one thanked me. No one defended me. With a hand that didn't tremble, I picked up the pen. Xavier mistook my silence for defeat. He didn't realize that with his own flamboyant signature already stamped at the bottom of those documents, he had just set into motion the one clause that would undo him. I left the boardroom with my dignity intact. But once the heavy door closed behind me, the silence pressed in. For the first time in 25 years, I wasn't walking back to my office. I wasn't staying late to run simulations, to prepare slides, to save a project no one else understood. I was simply gone. The bitterness rose sharp in my throat as I thought back on all I had given this place. I remembered the white fluorescent lights at 2 a.m., the hum of servers, the only sound while everyone else slept. There were weeks I barely saw my own family because I was here, building systems that kept this company alive. I remembered the birthdays I missed, the vacations canceled, the excuses whispered into a phone at midnight while Jake asked, "Dad, will you be home tomorrow?" The answer was almost always no. The company had become my second marriage, except this one demanded everything and gave nothing back. My real marriage had crumbled under its weight years ago. Sarah had told me once, "You're married to that company more than you are to me." She wasn't wrong. I wore loyalty like armor, convincing myself that sacrifice meant security. There were scars, too, though they never showed on any quarterly report. I thought of the morning I collapsed at my desk, my chest tight, my vision blurred. The paramedics said it was exhaustion compounded by stress. A colleague rode with me to the hospital, laptop in hand, because even from a gurney I was still answering emails. The company had praised me for it. Dedicated, they said. Irreplaceable, irreplaceable. Until I wasn't. I closed my eyes and remembered the worst scare of all, the night we almost lost everything. One shipment delay in Taiwan triggered a cascade of failures across 3 continents. For 48 hours, I lived on coffee and sheer willpower, pulling strings, making calls, begging old favors until the network held together by threads finally stabilized. It was that crisis years ago that changed me. In the aftermath, I realized something chilling. This empire stood on trust I had personally built, not on Xavier's charisma or boardroom bravado. And trust could vanish as quickly as it was given. That was the moment I insisted on adding a clause buried deep in the licensing agreements. If the original architect was ever removed without cause, all operational rights reverted back to me. The board signed it without question, desperate to lock in my loyalty. They never even read the fine print. It was my safety net, hidden beneath layers of legal jargon. I hadn't thought I would ever need it. I believed loyalty would be enough. Now, walking away with bitterness cutting through every breath, I realized that clause wasn't just a footnote in a contract. It was my lifeline. And Xavier, in his arrogance, had just handed me the leverage I never thought I would use. The whispers started almost immediately after I left the boardroom. I hadn't even cleared out my desk before the gossip began to snake its way through the corridors. Nepotism, they muttered in hushed tones by the coffee machines. The CEO's daughter. Can you believe it? I caught fragments as I walked past clusters of employees pretending not to stare. Some were sympathetic, but most were wary. No one wanted to be next. And then there was Aurora, the new face of Vertec. She walked the halls like she already owned them, her glossy heels clicking on the tile. I watched her from a distance, still lingering around the office in those last hours, tying up loose ends. She entered her first strategy meeting with Xavier trailing behind her like a proud father. But when she opened her mouth, the mask slipped. She used technical terms out of context, confusing cloud redundancy with server mirroring, and at one point suggested uploading patents to the blockchain to protect them. The room fell into an awkward silence. Senior engineers shifted in their seats, glancing at each other with disbelief. I felt my fists tighten under the table. 25 years of precise language, of hard-earned credibility, and here was a child playing executive, speaking in buzzwords she barely understood. My face betrayed nothing, but inside the anger coiled tighter. Later that day, her Instagram post circulated among employees, a selfie in the executive suite captioned, "Work hard, play harder. Running billion-dollar projects before 25. Number tech leadership. Number innovation. Number disrupt the norm." My throat burned with the injustice. I thought of the countless nights I'd slept in that same office chair, too exhausted to drive home. And now the same chair was a photo prop, a backdrop for hashtags. Still, I stayed silent. Rage pressed at the edges of my composure, but silence was my shield. I wasn't going to give Xavier the satisfaction of seeing me break. I let them believe I was gone quietly, watching as arrogance bloomed unchecked in the space I had once filled with discipline and grit. As I slipped into the elevator, my phone buzzed. A message lit up the screen from an old colleague who had been with me since the early days. "She won't last a month. Everyone can see it." For the first time that day, I let the corner of my mouth lift. It wasn't joy, not yet. It was recognition, the quiet confirmation that I wasn't alone. Others saw the cracks forming. They saw what Xavier refused to see. You cannot replace 25 years of sweat, scars, and sacrifice with a surname and a smile. I tucked the phone back into my pocket and walked out of the building. My anger was still there, sharp and alive. But beneath it pulsed something stronger, patience. I didn't need to explode now. The collapse would come. And when it did, I would be ready. I packed my desk slowly, each item a reminder of the years I had poured into this company. The framed photo of Jake, taken when he was just a boy in Little League, now grown and in college. The worn leather notebook filled with sketches of systems that had turned into patents worth billions. Even the half-dead plant by the window, a survivor of endless nights I spent hunched over spreadsheets instead of at home. Every object carried a story, but none of them had earned me a thank you. Colleagues drifted by, their eyes flickering toward me with the same mixture of pity and fear. Some murmured quick goodbyes, voices thick with unease, as if acknowledging me too warmly might mark them next for exile. Others simply avoided my gaze, focusing intently on their screens while sneaking glances at my emptying shelves. It was the look people give at funerals, the uneasy relief that it isn't them in the casket. I offered them a small, practiced smile, a calm mask that hid the storm beneath. Let them think I was broken, defeated, resigned. In truth, I felt steadier than I had in years. Because while Xavier and Aurora strutted around with their borrowed confidence, I knew the truth. The company's lifeline still ran through me. The supply chain, the 17 international partners, the intricate agreements that bound them together, those threads were mine, and no smirk or signature could erase that. As I closed the final drawer, I slid my badge into my pocket. It was just a piece of plastic, yet it had opened doors others couldn't even see. I traced the edges with my thumb, thinking of how many nights it had beeped green at 2 a.m. while I rushed in to save a failing launch. Today would be the last time it passed through the scanner. Or so they believed. Walking through the open office, I felt the weight of eyes on my back. To them, I was a ghost already. But ghosts have power, don't they? Silent, unseen, yet capable of freezing the blood of those who thought themselves untouchable. I reached the lobby and pressed my badge against the scanner. A sharp beep sounded, and on the screen in bold green letters appeared, "Access granted." For a split second, I nearly laughed. The system still recognized me as essential. They hadn't cut me off. Xavier, in his arrogance, hadn't even bothered to confirm that the foundations he so carelessly discarded were actually gone. I stepped out into the sunlight, the doors sliding closed behind me. To anyone watching, I was just another fired employee leaving with his box of belongings. But inside, calm as a blade hidden in velvet, I carried the quiet certainty that the story wasn't over. The morning after my exit, I woke earlier than usual, the habit of decades refusing to release me. For the first time in years, there was no commute, no stack of reports waiting on my desk. Instead, I poured a cup of coffee and sat by the window, the city stirring to life below me. I should have felt empty. Instead, I felt a sharp, electric anticipation humming beneath my skin. At exactly 9 a.m., the first crack appeared. A partner in Germany halted a critical shipment of specialized processors. The message was blunt, clinical, and unmistakable. License inactive. Original architect required. I could picture the scene unfolding inside the executive wing without being there. Xavier would be pacing, face flushed with anger, barking orders at assistants who had no answers. Aurora would be scrolling frantically through old files, cheeks burning as she tried to mask her confusion. The arrogance of yesterday's smirk would dissolve the moment she realized the system wasn't impressed by her hashtags. For me, it was a moment of pure, quiet satisfaction. Not gloating, not revenge, just the validation of a truth I had always known. They could take my office, my badge, my title. But the lifelines of this company were tied to me and me alone. By mid-morning, the whispers had already spread through the building. Former colleagues texted me fragments of hallway chatter. They're saying without Alexander, no one knows what to do. Aurora just froze in the meeting. She couldn't explain the protocols. The pitying glances that had followed me out yesterday had shifted into something else entirely, doubt in the new regime. And then, as if fate itself wanted to stoke the fire, an email pinged in my inbox. It was from a logistics coordinator in Singapore, mistakenly CCing me on a chain meant for Xavier. The subject line made my lips curve into a slow smile. Escalation. Supply chain collapse risk. I scrolled through the thread, each line confirming what I already knew. Delays cascading from Germany, Singapore hesitating to move shipments without validation, Canada requesting immediate clarification. The entire network I had stitched together, relationship by relationship, was tightening like a net, and Xavier had no idea how to loosen it. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee, the bitterness softened by satisfaction. Yesterday they had looked at me like a relic, disposable and outdated. Today, less than 24 hours later, the company was already unraveling in my absence. No one on the outside knew yet. To the public, Vertex still looked stable, gleaming, unstoppable. But I could feel it. The ground shifting, the cracks widening. And with every passing hour, the weight of silence pressed heavier on Xavier's shoulders. I closed the email and set my cup down gently, savoring the moment. They thought I was gone. In truth, I had never been more present. By the following morning, the ripples had become waves. Germany's refusal had been the first crack, but now the entire foundation was shaking. Singapore froze all logistics clearance, citing the same condition, license inactive. Original architect required. Within hours, Canada followed suit, canceling a scheduled shipment worth millions. And one by one, 17 international partners, the arteries of Vertex empire, sent nearly identical responses. The message was unmistakable. Without me, nothing moved. Inside the building, chaos reigned. Reports later filtered back to me. Assistants sprinting down hallways, phones ringing without pause, meetings stretching late into the night with no progress. The arrogance that had filled the boardroom the day I was dismissed had evaporated, replaced with panic. Yet Xavier still clung to his delusion of control, his voice echoing through conference rooms as he demanded results that no one could deliver. And then came the false hope. In the middle of a particularly frantic morning, Aurora stood up in front of the executive team with a polished slide deck. She spoke with the practiced enthusiasm of someone who had never weathered a true crisis. "We've identified the problem," she declared, flashing a smile meant for cameras, though no cameras were present. "It's a technical glitch in the contract database. Our legal team is confident we can override it. We'll have operations back online within hours." For a brief moment, the illusion worked. The board members clapped hesitantly, desperate for something, anything that sounded like control. The stock price even ticked upward that afternoon, a fragile heartbeat suggesting recovery. Xavier allowed himself a smirk, leaning back in his chair as though the nightmare had been nothing more than a passing storm. But storms don't vanish when someone declares them over. That evening, the system spoke for itself. A synchronized cascade of messages hit every node across the global network. Contract invalid. Original architect missing. Every partner, every supplier, every logistical hub displayed the same unambiguous phrase. The false hope shattered instantly. Calls dropped, screens froze. The stock, which had briefly rallied, plummeted even harder than before. Xavier's temper exploded. He dialed partners personally, his voice rising, his charm replaced with desperation. Most didn't answer. One finally did, a supplier in Montreal. The conversation, I was told later, lasted less than 2 minutes. When Xavier demanded to know why they refused to cooperate, the supplier cut him off cold. "We only work with Alexander Stroud." And then the line went dead. I imagined his face in that moment, the veins tightening at his temples, the dawning realization that his power was slipping not just from his hands, but from the very walls around him. For years, he had believed he owned the empire. Now he was discovering it had never truly been his. It had always been mine. The tension across the company reached a fever pitch. Employees whispered in corridors, wondering how long they had before paychecks bounced. Investors demanded answers. And in the middle of it all, I remained quiet, watching from the outside. The collapse wasn't complete yet, but the cracks were now canyons, and Xavier was standing on a ledge that would soon give way. The boardroom at Vertec was in flames, though not literally. Xavier had called an emergency meeting at dawn, dragging in exhausted executives with dark circles under their eyes. The air was thick with desperation. Every screen on the wall pulsed with red alerts, contracts invalid. Supply chain halted. Sienna stood at the front with her laptop connected, trying to project confidence as she flipped through a glossy PowerPoint deck. "We have several contingency options," she chirped, her voice cracking slightly. Graphs slid across the screen, filled with colorful arrows pointing upward, but her words were drowned out by the barrage of furious voices. Investors joined remotely, faces crowding the monitors like an angry jury. "Our shares are collapsing," one shouted. "Why did no one flag this risk?" demanded another. Xavier raised his hands, barking for order, but the chaos surged louder. For the first time, his usual charisma faltered. Meanwhile, outside of the glass tower, the story had already escaped containment. By noon, headlines blared across business networks. Vertec supply chain collapse, tied to missing architect. The public latched onto it instantly. On Twitter, the hashtag #BringBackAlexander began trending, first in the city, then across the country. Memes surfaced overnight, contrasting my years of service with Aurora's hollow slogans. One particularly brutal post quoted her Instagram selfie, "Work hard, play harder," dash overlaid on a plummeting stock chart. Employees added fuel of their own. On LinkedIn, an anonymous account posted, "This company fired the wrong person. Without Alexander, nothing works." The post went viral among industry professionals, gathering thousands of comments in hours. The company's carefully constructed facade of confidence was crumbling in full public view. And where was I? Sitting in a quiet cafe 2 blocks away, sipping black coffee and scrolling through the news on my phone. The chatter of strangers filled the air, but none of it touched me. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt steady. The world was unraveling around Xavier, and I didn't need to lift a finger. As I skimmed through the chaos online, my phone buzzed with a new message. It wasn't from a friend or a colleague. It was from a private number. The words were simple but sharp as a blade. "We need to meet. Off the record. Tonight." The sender identified themselves only with a title. Board member, Vertec. I leaned back in my chair, letting the phone rest on the table. So the board was already looking for lifeboats. The irony was exquisite. They had allowed Xavier to discard me without a second thought. And now, not even a week later, they were reaching out in secret, hoping the man they had dismissed could save them. I stirred my coffee slowly, calm as the eye of the storm. Let Xavier and Aurora scramble. Let the public tear their reputation apart. I had all the time in the world. The boardroom was silent except for the faint hum of the projector. All eyes were fixed on the screen where a single document filled the wall in stark black and white. It was the dismissal agreement Xavier had so triumphantly pushed across the table to me days earlier. The header glowed under the projector light, and at the bottom, in bold ink, sat his unmistakable signature. The company's lead counsel cleared his throat, voice tight with discomfort. "As you can see, Clause 17 was triggered upon Mr. Stroud's dismissal. It explicitly states that if the original architect is removed without cause, all rights tied to the associated patents automatically revert to him." For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of the revelation pressed against the glass walls, suffocating. Marcus sat frozen, his jaw slack, eyes darting from the document to the lawyer as if sheer will could erase the words. Then the eruption came. He slammed his hand on the table, face blotched crimson. "This is absurd!" "I'll sue him. I'll tie him up in court until he crawls back begging." His voice cracked under the strain, the fury tinged with desperation. The counsel didn't flinch. His voice remained calm, clinical, merciless. "With respect, you have no grounds. The clause is airtight. You signed it yourself. There is no path forward in litigation. You'd lose instantly." The board members shifted in their seats, the air heavy with disgust. The veneer of Xavier's authority was dissolving in real time. One director leaned forward, eyes cold. So let me understand this. You fired the one person holding our supply chain together, and in doing so, you handed her ownership of 42 patents worth over $1 billion? Xavier opened his mouth, but no words came. His arrogance, once unshakable, had turned to ash. He looked like a man staring into a mirror for the first time and seeing his own ruin staring back. Around the table, whispers spread like sparks catching dry leaves. Investor faces glared from the screens, fury laced with disbelief. One muttered, "We've been destroyed by his ego." Another, more blunt, "He's finished." Xavier tried again, his voice hoarse. This can be renegotiated. We can buy him out. But the lead counsel cut him off. Number. He holds the rights legally, absolutely, and irrevocably. You signed the document, Mr. Blackwood. It's binding. The final blow came not from the lawyer, but from within his own ranks. A board member, one of his longest allies, leaned back in his chair and let out a humorless laugh. Then, in a tone as sharp as glass, he delivered the verdict. You didn't just sign his severance, he said coldly. You signed your own death warrant. The silence that followed was absolute. Xavier sat hollow-eyed, the reality finally crushing him. For the first time, the empire he thought he controlled had slipped entirely from his grasp. The storm inside Vertec could no longer be contained within boardroom walls. By dawn the next day, it spilled into every headline, every business channel, every news ticker that scrolled across television screens. Vertec in crisis, $1.1 billion patents transferred. CEO's fatal mistake costs company its future. The story spread like wildfire, igniting outrage and fascination in equal measure. Xavier, once the darling of business magazines, could no longer walk from his chauffeur car to the front doors without being swarmed. Cameras flashed, microphones shoved in his face, questions hurled like stones. He ducked his head, shielding his face with a briefcase, but the shutters caught him anyway, his polished composure gone, his features twisted with stress and fear. And Aurora, the girl who had grinned across from me on the day of my dismissal, flaunting her youth like a weapon, she vanished. No public appearances, no social media posts. Her once constant stream of curated photos went dark overnight. It was as if she had been erased as swiftly as she had been installed. Inside the company, the collapse was accelerating. HR offices were flooded with resignation letters. Some were typed in cold, others handwritten and scrolled in anger. I will not serve under failed leadership. This company betrayed its own architect. By the end of the week, entire departments were operating at half capacity. The exodus was a quiet protest, but one that spoke louder than any headline. Meanwhile, the public turned me into an unlikely symbol. One network replayed the security footage of me leaving the building with my box of belongings, calm, composed, silent. The anchor's voiceover called it the walk of quiet power. Viewers latched onto it, sharing the clip across platforms. Strangers I had never met wrote messages of solidarity. This is what dignity looks like. They underestimated the wrong man. For Xavier, the humiliation only deepened. At a hastily arranged press conference, sweat beaded his temples as he tried to deflect responsibility. Reporters shouted over one another, their voices rising like a storm. Then came the question that broke whatever illusion of control he had left. Mr. Blackwood, one journalist barked, are you aware that the $1.1 billion portfolio of patents now belongs entirely to Alexander Stroud? The room fell into stunned silence. Cameras zoomed in as Xavier froze, his lips parting, but no words emerging. He glanced toward his counsel, but the man sat stiff and silent, unwilling to rescue him. The silence stretched, heavy and damning, until the shouts began again, louder, more relentless than before. That clip replayed on every news channel by nightfall. Over and over, the public watched the once untouchable CEO silenced by the weight of his own failure. His empire, his image, his power, it was all unraveling under the harsh light of cameras. While I, the man he had discarded, stood taller in absence than he ever had in presence. The papers came through on a Monday morning, crisp and final. My name, Alexander Stroud, was now officially listed as the sole owner of 42 patents valued at $1.1 billion. No loopholes, no conditions, no one else's fingerprints but mine. For the first time in 25 years, my work was not tethered to someone else's ambition. It was mine to shape, mine to protect. I didn't return to Vertec. I had no reason to. Instead, I chose my allies carefully. The partners who had stood by me through sleepless nights and near disasters were the first calls I made. They answered with relief in their voices, eager to re-establish ties, this time on terms of mutual respect. Within weeks, I opened a modest but bright office downtown, walls still bare but air alive with possibility. It wasn't about grandeur. It was about freedom. On my desk sat a small wooden plaque, freshly engraved, Chief Architect Alexander Stroud. The title was more than recognition. It was a declaration that I had survived betrayal and reclaimed my worth. As I placed it in the center of the desk, my hand brushed against the old watch strapped to my wrist. It had been a gift from Xavier when I first joined, back when promises of loyalty still felt unbreakable. I unclasped it slowly, laid it beside the plaque, and left it there, a relic of a past I no longer carried. The twist came quietly, like opportunity often does. An international conglomerate approached me with an offer to serve as a global advisor, overseeing innovation strategies across multiple industries. It was a position higher than anything I had ever imagined, a role that carried influence far beyond the narrow walls I had once been confined to. I accepted, not for power, but for the chance to ensure that no one else would ever be erased the way I had been. By Friday, Xavier was forced to resign. His empire collapsed under the weight of his arrogance, while mine was just beginning to rise. Jake visited that weekend, bringing his girlfriend to meet his dad. We talked about his plans after graduation, about the startup idea he'd been developing. I listened, really listened, without checking my phone once. "You seem different, Dad," he said as they were leaving. "Like you're actually here." I finally learned this difference between building something for someone else and building something for yourself, I told him. The security footage still plays sometimes on business programs that walk through the lobby carrying my box of belongings while an empire crumbled behind me. But now I see it differently. I wasn't walking away in defeat. I was walking toward something better, something mine. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. It whispers. It comes in steady steps, in quiet exits, and in the calm certainty of truth revealed. The gray wolves of the tech world know something the young alphas forget. Experience isn't obsolete. It's irreplaceable. And when you try to replace the irreplaceable, the architecture collapses, not despite the foundation, but because of it. Xavier learned that lesson too late. I learned it just in time. If this story resonates with you, share your thoughts below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, because stories of resilience and justice deserve to be heard. The gray wolves are listening.